Today I'm going to do an in-depth review of managing macOS devices with Microsoft Intune, which was formerly known as Microsoft Endpoint Manager, which was a subset of Microsoft Endpoint Manager Configuration Manager, which worked alongside of Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager before it was rebranded from initially Microsoft Intune, which worked alongside of System Center Configuration Manager, which was later known as Microsoft Endpoint Configuration Manager, but more popular, everyone just called it SCCM, which is all a part of Entra, which was formerly known as Azure. So let's get started. My name is Christopher Shasi. I am the owner of Rocketman Tech. We help organizations succeed with their Apple products. That's iPhones, iPads, Mac computers, Apple TVs, Apple Vision Pros, Apple Watches, anything that Apple produces that can be managed with an MDM. We work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, fast-growing tech companies, branding companies, universities, and anyone who has any complex workflows. So our agenda today, we're going to look over the Microsoft Intune interface. We're going to compare it to Jamf Pro, which is really going to be our biggest section where we dive into the meat of this. How does this compare to Jamf Pro? Jamf Pro is the MDM that we use at Rocketman to manage all of our clients' servers. So we want to see how that compares to what we've been using, and as well as the industry standard for managing Mac computers. Once we go over that, we're going to go over the support channels for both Intune and Jamf Pro, go over the different pricing structures for these two platforms, and then give our closing thoughts about what we think about this platform. Now, reviewing Intune was no small undertaking, and I wanted to give you an idea of how much work actually went into this type of review. First off, we conducted 4 different interviews with 2 different Intune experts, just so we could really grasp what's possible with this platform. We set up a full provisioning workflow, did lots of testing. I do want to point out that I do have 9 years of MDM experience. And when I say 9 years, I mean my life, my career has been dedicated to using MDM platforms. So although this is the first time I've been using Intune, I have a lot of experience managing macOS devices in similar platforms. And we put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to making sure that the content we're putting together is accurate and that it's really showcasing what is possible with the Intune platform, especially when compared to Jamf Pro. So without further ado, this is going to be a long one. Grab a coffee if you have one, and let's dive in and look at the Intune interface. So when you log in, the first thing you'll see is this home page, which gives you a bird's eye view of some of the statuses that you have. If you want to customize that a bit more, you can create custom dashboards. This is one I created before. It's really a drag and drop grid type thing, pretty easy to use, kind of cool looking. Moving on, we got all services here, which is really just the sidebar over here with a couple other features that don't really apply to macOS. So let's look at the macOS specific stuff. So I'm going to click on devices and then macOS. And first I'm able to see all my devices. I only enrolled one in this demo, but we'll go ahead and click it. So this is where I get the inventory for this device. So on the left-hand side here, I have all the different properties and different hardware and things I can look at about this device specifically. And then on the top, I have the different MDM commands I can do. I can retire the device, wipe it, delete it, send a remote lock, sync the device if I want to get a command onto the computer, remove the passcode if it has it, restart, shut down, and disable the activation lock. But let's look at what we can actually do to the devices. So I'm going to click these breadcrumbs up top and go to macOS enrollment. So this is where I can set up my push certificate along with the automated device enrollment integration. I'm going to go into enrollment program tokens. Inside of here, this was hard for me to find the first time. This is where you can set up your pre-stage enrollment. And here I can see the properties that I have set for this. I'm enrolling with user Affinity and skipping these setup assistance steps. Next, we're going to look at the macOS policies that we can send. First is compliance policies. These are the device compliance policies that we can set for the device, basically stating, hey, if it's not file vault encrypted, we're going to mark it as non-compliant, and there's different actions you can take from there. Here we have our configuration profiles that we can deploy to the device. This operates kind of similar to Jamf Pro, except the user interface is quite a bit different. So I'll give you a quick look of what that's like. First of all, we have some preset templates here. If you want to set things like Wi-Fi or a SCEP certificate or something like that, or we can just use the settings catalog to create something from scratch. So the settings catalog allows us to click add settings, and then we can either navigate through here, which is a little bit hard to figure out where things are, or you can just filter through here, which is a lot easier. So if I filter for something like File Vault, I can see all the different File Vault related things. I can click them to add them to the profile. And then I just need to go and select what I want the options to be for these specific profiles. Next, let's look at shell scripts. This is pretty simple and similar to Jamf. I just upload a shell script here, and the text will show up in this area showing the shell script that I've deployed. Now, if I go back, I have one here that renames the computer, and you'll be able to see what that looks like. Now, this is not an editor. I cannot edit this. It's just read only to show me what is in the script. Next are custom attributes. These are similar to extension attributes in Jamf Pro. So if you see in the properties here, again, I just have a script. I still can't edit it, but whatever is outputted in the script will be outputted in this test attribute or this extension attribute. Custom attribute it's called, sorry. And then lastly, the update policies for macOS. So this allows me to set a macOS update policy. If I go to create profile here, you'll be able to see what it looks like. Allows me to define these different types of things. It allows me to schedule it at a specific time. And this is used in conjunction with a configuration profile that allows me to control the version that is deployed to the device. Next, let's look at apps. So if I click on the apps and click macOS, you'll see the macOS specific apps that I can deploy. Here I'm able to automatically deploy the latest version of a couple apps, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Edge, and Microsoft Defender. I will say with Microsoft Office, it does the whole suite, so you can't pick and choose which applications you want. We can also deploy a web clip or a web link. I tested both of these and could not figure out any difference between the two. They seem to operate exactly the same. It's essentially just a shortcut, a web shortcut that goes into your dock. A line of business app, which I haven't been able to find any real use case for. It's really for in-house apps. And then the main one you'll be using, if you're using Intune, is these macOS apps, which you can use either a DMG or PKG. Most of the time I recommend a PKG. Looking at endpoint security, we can do things like setting an antivirus policy, setting a disk encryption policy, firewall, and then these are only Windows specific. So I'm going to go down to device compliance, which we looked at earlier, as well as conditional access, which I didn't really go over because it's kind of a legacy feature. We have our user directory linked here. And then we have groups as well. And this allows us to set up both user groups and dynamic device groups, which is similar to smart computer groups within Jamf Pro. So that's a really quick look inside of the interface of Microsoft Intune, specifically for managing macOS devices. Now let's get to the meat of this review, which is comparing Intune to Jamf Pro's features. We're going to start off by looking at probably the most powerful part of Jamf Pro, and that is policies. So Intune doesn't have any like policy equivalent, but it has a couple different things that it uses. So for instance, Jamf can deploy packages to devices using policies. Intune has apps that it deploys. Jamf has software updates that it can deploy. And Intune has update policies. I will say, like, there is the software update payload within Jamf Pro. And I'm going to go over software updates later, but that's a much smaller part of what it does. But I'm just kind of comparing these two features. We have scripts inside Jamf Pro, which is similar to shell scripts within Microsoft Intune. However, I did want to make a call out that there was a limitation, which at first glance probably doesn't sound like as big of a deal, but you can only deploy shell scripts that are 200 kilobytes in size. The reason I'm putting this out is this is actually smaller than many of the main scripts we use. One of them that I wanted to point out was Kevin White's Superman script. We've had him at our meetup a couple times. This is a great one for deploying macOS updates in a much more user-friendly way. However, you can't deploy it using a shell script in Intune because of this limitation. I will also say there are other ways we can deploy those types of scripts, but I wanted to point that out as something that is kind of annoying. And then Jamf Pro, you can deploy printers, doc items, local accounts, directory bindings, EFI password. You can update the inventory, and you can also, and this is really important, set triggers. None of this you can do in Intune. Setting triggers is kind of important because that's something we use in a lot of our custom workflows across many of our custom tools, or just if we need to do something in a unique way through a script, or just having things happen at certain times. Triggers are a really big part of Jamf policies, and that is something you can't do through Intune. Frequency is another big thing too. You can't do any type of frequency. It just deploys the thing to the computer once. That's pretty much everything that is deployed. However, scripts you can deploy a frequency for in Intune, but you can't do it for packages or software updates. So that's kind of how policies compare to Jamf Pro and Intune. Next, let's look at configuration profiles. Now, configuration profiles are pretty similar in terms of features. So what I did is I looked at what are the configuration profiles we use pretty regularly, because most of them we don't use. But there's a lot of them. I was at least looking at payloads in Jamf Pro. There's a lot of them we use pretty regularly, and I wanted to see if those were all supported by Intune. And pretty much all of them are, except approved kernel extensions. Now, I did want to point out that with extensive testing, with working with Intune experts trying to figure this out, I was not able to get FileVault to work. So although I found the profile, I set it up based on Microsoft's documentation. I have changed it several times. I have tried everything I can to get this to work. Talked to people that actually knew what they were doing, and none of us could get FileVault to work. So I wanted to point out, because that's a pretty big thing, we could not get these computers to force a FileVault configuration, which for most organizations is like bare minimum what you need in order to have a managed computer in your environment from a security perspective. So, but for the most part, they're pretty similar as far as feature set goes. Let's talk software updates. So Intune's software updates was a lot stronger. I did test these out. It did work. It did update my device. And, you know, it has some of the same problems that Jamf Pro has in a lot of cases where, you know, if you send a DDM type software update, it's just going to restart the device without really warning the user. But we were able to do that. We were able to set a lot of that stuff. But I did want to point out, Jamf has a lot of things that Intune doesn't really have when it comes to software updates. And that's just the ability to deploy it to a single device through a command, which maybe isn't that useful. Also deploy it through a master command to a group of devices. But I think the most important one is the ability to do it using the API. And the reason I point that out is that it's used by tools like Superman to be able to utilize the DDM software updates inside of their better system for notifying the users when this is happening and allowing them to defer and stuff like that. So although Intune's a lot better with software updates, Jamf does allow a lot more functionality that especially works well with third-party tools. Now, I was pointing out there were some things in the Intune platform that Jamf didn't have, which was like deploying the critical updates, firmware updates, configuration profile updates, stuff like that. Now, I wasn't 100% sure what these were or how important they were, but I did want to point out that there were some ways that Intune was actually stronger than Jamf when it came to macOS updates. I think one of the biggest things is the schedule type. This is something I wish Jamf had, because when we deploy software updates through Jamf, either using the new software update beta feature or through a mass command, it's basically like, I'm deploying it now. I can't say I want to deploy it later. But that's something you are able to do through Intune, including like deploying it at certain hours and stuff like that. And then I also wanted to point out the support for third-party resources. Now, I say support, but it's really that a lot of organizations, because Jamf is the industry standard, build products to work specifically with Jamf in special ways, even if they're MDM agnostic. And Superman's a good point of this. Because it's using Jamf API commands to do certain stuff, it also utilizes Jamf parameters, something that Intune obviously doesn't have, nor does it have an equivalent of that when deploying scripts. You kind of just have to hard code the values into the scripts. And like I said before, you can't even deploy this as a script through Microsoft Intune. You'd have to package it and set up a custom workflow just to get the script working. Another one I wanted to point out was Erase Install. It actually does fit within that maximum size, but as the script is growing, as Graham is going to update the script, it may at some point reach that maximum size. It also utilizes Jamf parameters, and there is documentation specifically built for Jamf Pro and none specifically for Intune. Not saying that means you can't use this or that documentation might not be good enough for you to figure out how to do it in Intune, but this is something you're going to see across the board. If you use any third-party tools, yes, they might be MDM agnostic, but getting support for those tools or even finding documentation specifically for how to get it work with Intune, or just knowing that people have tested it extensively on the Intune platform, you're not going to get as much out of that product as you are through something like Jamf Pro. Third-party patch management. This really, I shouldn't even be comparing these two, but I do want to point this out just so you can kind of see. So Intune does have automatic deployment for a couple apps, and I showed that in the interface. It's really just a couple Microsoft apps. There's 9 of them in total. But it's essentially just downloading them through a script. It's not a secure deployment like Jamf's doing through a package. There are no automated updates for that, although with those, there is patch management built in to the apps themselves. Microsoft has the Microsoft Auto Updater and stuff like that. But the thing I'm saying with this is Intune's probably not going to invest heavily into this because they really haven't even built a framework for it. They just did it for a couple of their own apps. There's no self-service deployment. It's just either on or off. There are no custom notifications or force quit settings or anything like that. Jamf has a really robust solution with app installers, and Intune doesn't really have anything close to that. Here are all the titles that Intune supports for what you might call patch management. Jamf, on the other hand, has 181 titles, which I wanted to give you a quick look of what that looks like when we put it all out. Quite a lot of them. It has even more patch management for Microsoft apps than Intune does. Like it supports a couple of things outside of just the Microsoft Office apps, like Microsoft Remote Desktop and things like that. Next, let's look at smart computer groups. This is another really powerful part of Jamf Pro. So Intune has something similar to that called dynamic device groups. So I wanted to take a look at how these two compare. When it comes to operators, Intune actually has quite a bit that you can use as an operator. But the one thing that Jamf has that really blows it out of the water is the ability to use regular expressions. That is huge for me. I love using regular expressions. It allows me to drill down into exactly what I need every time. And it's not something that Intune supports. But I think where Jamf really shines is its amount of criteria. So Intune has 17 different criteria that they have for their smart computer groups, whereas Jamf has 153. Just to give you an idea of what 153 look like, I'm again going to bring you through every single criteria you can use for smart computer groups. And I wanted to bold one at the end that's super important that Intune doesn't support, and that is custom extension attributes. So with custom extension attributes, I can create a script or deploy anything else that can basically get me any information from the computer, and that can be used in a smart computer group, which is a super powerful thing that we use in a lot of different ways to create quick fixes for all kinds of stuff. Now, although Intune does support extension attributes and does support the Intune input type being a script, it doesn't allow us to use it in any type of assignments, which is really where the power of this comes in. I'll also note it doesn't even show it in the inventory. You have to go into the profile itself to see all of the devices and what their outputs were. It doesn't allow you to like sort it or create reports or anything like that. So these are much, much, much less useful than the ones in Jamf Pro. It also doesn't allow for manual input of any type. So like a pop-up menu or text field. And it also doesn't allow updates via the API. So that's another workflow we use quite a bit, is setting an extension attribute, but updating it with the API through a script we've made or something else. So there is one thing in extension attributes that Intune has over Jamf, and that's the ability to assign these to specific devices. Jamf, with extension attributes, it's all or nothing. You basically are deploying it to all the devices in your server, or you're not deploying it to any. You can't say, I'm only going to deploy it to this group of devices. And that's something that Intune does do. Something I kind of wish Jamf did sometimes, because you don't want to clutter your server with 100 extension attributes. It'd be nice to just be able to scope it to the specific devices that need it. Next, let's look at Prestage Enrollments. Although Prestage Enrollments in Jamf and Intune look pretty similar, when you drill down into it, you realize Intune's missing a lot of pretty important features here. So, first one, which is pretty important, is prevent user from enabling activation lock. Definitely something we want to do in pretty much every server that we support, since that can be really annoying when a user does that. But that's not something that Intune supports. Setting a recovery to lock password, not something I've personally used for any of my clients, but a nice thing to have. Automatically advanced through Setup Assistant, big for schools. I doubt anyone's really considering using Intune if they're a school, but yeah, that's probably a big one that you'll need. And then really what I was finding that I was kind of surprised on is there's really no way to manage the local administrator account that gets deployed to the computer. So you can't skip the account creation. You can't set that like first local administrator account like you can in Jamf Pro. You can't pre-fill the primary account information. You can't deploy any enrollment packages, which is essential for Jamf Connect login, or any certificates. And although you can deploy configuration profiles in the pre-stage, it only allows us to do all the configuration profiles that you're deploying to the device. And that's not recommended by Apple because it can actually create issues with the enrollment. you really want to limit the configuration profiles to only what you need for specifically the login window. So really the main use case for this is Jamf Connect login, where it's like, I want to deploy a logo, a background, and specifically the Jamf Connect login configuration. Those will be deployed as both an enrollment package and a configuration profile. That's really what that should be used for. If you have like 20 or even 50 profiles that you're deploying to a computer, it might make the device fail to enroll, which can be a really bad spot in the setup assistant. So next, I wanted to talk about Jamf Connect versus user affinity. I really shouldn't even be comparing these two features. User affinity is really in line with like SSO integration within Jamf Pro, along with enrollment customizations. It really doesn't compete with Jamf Connect, and that's why you'll see a lot more features that Jamf Connect supports. So it's able to integrate with other LDAP servers and IDPs. User affinity can only be done through Microsoft Intune. It has its own login window. User affinity clearly doesn't. It keeps the password synced. User affinity doesn't really even have a macOS app to do that. You can create multiple user accounts, and you can also create Kerberos tokens. All things you can't do with user affinity through Intune. One thing I will say though is the platform SSO plugin will allow for some of these features to happen. It's still not quite as robust as Jamf Connect, but as Apple builds into that in the coming years, this may be less and less of an important thing to focus on. But at this point right now, Jamf Connect can do a lot more than what you can do natively in Intune. Next, I wanted to look at self-service versus company portal. So first, I want to start off talking about some cool things that company portal does that self-service doesn't do. First of all, you get device information, not built into self-service at all. And it's kind of cool. I wish they had that. Next, although maybe I should have an asterisk next to this, it can give you your device recovery key. On the macOS side, not really that important, right? I mean, that's kind of cool. I guess the user could write it down somewhere and then store it. But besides that, it's like if you are locked out of your computer, you can't get into self-service to get your recovery key. One thing I will note, though, is I'm really hoping you're able to get this through iOS. I didn't test out enrolling an iOS device, so I guess that was a mistake on my part. So I'm not sure if you can get it on an iOS device, because that would be really cool. But if not, then yeah, it's really pointless to have that. But I want to show what Jamf does that you can't do through Company Portal, and it's a lot, because within Jamf, you can pretty much put everything in self-service, including app installers, which was a new feature that they added, well, like a year ago. But a lot of people were excited about that. But like everything else you can do in self-service, you can do configuration profiles even, although there's not many use cases for that. Where in Intune, you can't do any of that stuff. You can't even deploy a script through self-service. So it's a lot more limited. I should call it Company Portal, not self-service. But within Intune, Company Portal is a lot more limited than self-service for Jamf Pro. And I really want to talk about this device check-in frequencies. This is something that was annoying the crap out of me when I was testing. And I was like, and once I started talking to having the interviews with the experts about this platform, I started to realize what was happening. So Intune has a check-in that's much longer than you would expect, 8 to 24 hours. And this is even for MDM commands. So let's look at Jamf Pro. Their agent check-in is like 5 to 60 minutes, and it's configurable. So you can set that to 5 minutes if you want things to really kick off quickly. MDM check-in is basically instantaneous. It's through Apple's push notification service, and in my opinion, that gets pushed down to my device basically as fast as a notification gets pushed down to my phone. Sometimes if you're doing a more complex operation like deploying an app, it can take 2 or 3 minutes. But if you're just deploying a configuration profile, it goes pretty instantaneous. I can also use the Jamf binary on the computer to run something like sudo Jamf policy or sudo Jamf recon or a bunch of other stuff to do a ton of Jamf operations on the device itself. Intune, the agent and the MDM check-in is a quoted 8 to 24 hours. And there's not really any way to configure that to be faster, which is crazy to me because your inventory gets so out of date because of that. And testing is just a drag when you're trying to deploy a new configuration profile and things are just not working. One thing I've learned too with configuration profiles, because I was testing out the file vault thing, the best thing to do instead of changing a profile like you do in Jamf Pro is just to delete it and create a new one, because you're going to be waiting for a long time for that to happen. But if you delete it and create a new one, it will push out a lot quicker. Not nearly as quick as it will happen in Jamf Pro if you just make a quick change to a profile. But yeah, it takes a long time to get those things to push down to the computer. And there's no Intune binary. So if you're on the computer itself and you want a policy or an app or something to kick off, you just gotta wait. And when I was setting up my computer, testing out zero-touch provisioning, I waited hours for some of my apps to install, and they just didn't install. So there's definitely like some, it does not work as well when it comes to like getting stuff onto the device quickly. It will eventually go there, but yeah, it just takes a little bit longer. Device compliance. This is a really important thing to point out. Device compliance is something created by Microsoft. Intune is a Microsoft product. But when talking to the experts about this, they mentioned that device compliance integration with Jamf Pro and Intune works better than the built-in device compliance from Intune alone. So I know Jamf has been partnering with Microsoft to set up this really cool integration. And it actually works better than just the built-in integration to Intune. And the reason is because it takes so long to update the device that if you're trying to make sure that devices are compliant to a certain standard, that integration with Jamf Pro is almost instantaneous. So it just takes a couple of minutes. Whereas if I'm waiting 8 to 24 hours to report back that a device is out of compliance, well, that's more of a security risk than if you were to just do the Jamf integration. So device compliance actually works better as an integration into Jamf Pro than just through Intune itself. Now let's look at Jamf Protect versus Microsoft Defender. And this is where I will say Intune maybe has a little bit of an edge here. Now, from talking to Simon, who is a security expert, he was saying if you're just managing macOS, Jamf Protect plus Jamf Pro is probably the best solution. However, Simon also mentioned with an EDR specifically, having that single pane of glass is really important. And most people that are listening to this are probably managing Windows as well. Well, why else would you have Intune? So in that case, Microsoft Defender is the better choice because it does give you that single pane of glass. But if money is not a factor, you can actually use both of these products together very well, and it will give you a much more robust solution because Jamf Protect does a lot of things that Microsoft Defender doesn't do, and vice versa. One thing I'll mention about this too, Microsoft Defender can be used with Jamf Pro. So if you're looking at a solution, you're like, all right, well, I want best in class for managing my macOS devices. Let's get Jamf Pro. And then I'm going to put Microsoft Defender on it. So I still kind of have that single pane of glass. You can use a lot of these different things with Jamf Pro and not just Intune. Let's dive into zero-touch provisioning. And this is where I was really finding the weaknesses in Intune because I just couldn't, to the best of my abilities, set up anything that was elegant. So when we're talking zero-touch provisioning, what are we talking about? We're talking about the ability for a user to set up a device by themselves without any IT interaction. And really when people are talking about this, they're talking about those onboarding screens that you see. That's the We've seen the third-party onboarding screens like Depth Notify, Swift Dialog, um, Splash Buddy is a popular one, Octary, all that stuff. There's lots of different solutions. None of those really work well with Intune as far as I could see. But the main reason that we're not able to do this is we just don't have any control over the provisioning process with Intune. Stuff happens in different orders. We can't control the order. It's not a predictable order. And I can't show which thing happens first, which if you want some type of third-party onboarding screen, you have to be able to deploy that before any of your other apps if you want to showcase which apps are being installed. And then with Jamf, of course, with macOS onboarding, we have built-in onboarding screens now. So it beats it out on two categories. Plus, you got to enroll over the provisioning process, which really allows you to control those provisioning screens along with what's deployed before what. A lot of the workflows we do inside of Jamf Pro is like deploying Jamf Connect and having that build that first user account. That's not something you can do within Microsoft Intune. I wanted to give you a quick look of what a typical zero-touch provisioning workflow looks like. So this is one we set up using Jamf Connect along with Depth Notify. User goes ahead and logs in with their credentials. It's going to go through this remote login screen. I'm going to have them select a couple things. And then it's going to go to this Jamf Connect login window where the user can log in with their username and password. And it's going to create that first account for them using this username and password they created. So already their account is synced. It prompted them for File Vault right here. So already they're logged in. Their username, password matches what's in their identity provider. And they have File Vault encrypted. And they also have this great onboarding screen bringing them through logging into each of the applications. So this is what that typical zero-touch provisioning workflow looks like. I show you this because I want to show you what it looks like with Intune. So this is a pretty rough video I put together. So I'm just going to scroll through it a little bit to show you what this looks like. So connecting to Wi-Fi. Now the first thing that pops up is a window having me log in to Microsoft Intune. Once I log in with my username and password, it brings me to this remote management screen. I will note that this remote management screen took longer than it normally does. It's one thing I've seen is things just seem to take a little bit longer with Intune. But it eventually worked and it went to this create a computer account. But I wasn't able to skip this account screen at all. And I also wasn't able to utilize something like Jamf Connect to create that first user account. The user just has to enter this manually. Select my time zone, and now I'm at the computer screen. Here, I don't have any type of onboarding windows. Minutes go by, things are just popping up. Another weird thing I ran into, and this is the same package I deployed through Jamf Connect, but it kept saying this keychain can't be found for Zoom. I'm not sure if this is an Intune thing. I'm just saying I've used the same package through Jamf Connect. I'm not getting that error. But it just kind of shows the difference in the elegance of a zero-touch provisioning process through a platform like Jamf Pro compared to something like Intune, which just has too many restrictions to consistently set up a good onboarding workflow. So next I want to look at an API comparison with the Microsoft Graph API versus the Jamf Swagger API. Now, we really weren't able to dive down and do a really good analysis of both of these APIs. Our team knows the Jamf API a lot more, so it's a lot easier to just say, hey, you can do a lot more with Jamf than Intune, but trying to, Intune, because their API supports a lot more than just macOS, it's really hard to drill down and see exactly what you're able to do with the Intune API. But I will say the Intune API is a little bit more modern and robust than the Jamf Swagger API, which at this point is a little bit more outdated and hard to use. Jamf also has their classic API versus the production API. The Jamf API is a little bit weird. Personally, I like it because it's what I learned and it's what I know, and you can do a lot with it. But I, will admit something like the Microsoft Graph API is a lot more robust. And there's a couple other features I wanted to point out that we really don't need to go into in as much depth. Restricted software, for instance, is not supported by Intune. Mac App Store apps is, and it's pretty similar between Jamf Pro and Intune. The one thing I was going to point out is you can't have duplicate apps in Intune. Patch management, nothing like that is in Intune. Can't do static computer groups, which is kind of interesting. You can only do those dynamic computer groups. You can, however, do user groups, very similar to Jamf Pro's user groups. You can do advanced computer searches, or you can't do advanced computer searches like you can in Jamf Pro, and you can't do custom alerts. Really, you can't do any type of reporting inside of Intune. So that is, in a nutshell, the difference between Jamf Pro and Intune when it comes to feature set. But let's talk a bit more about the platform support. So first off, let's look at documentation. Jamf's documentation, I will say, is pretty great. Jamf's done an amazing job of making sure their documentation is always up to date as far as I've been able to see. And they even have amazing supplemental white papers and videos. Intune's documentation, specifically for macOS, feels a little second class. It's often outdated and incomplete from the research I've seen, and stuff that it said would work a certain way simply didn't work that way, or the platform was just different than what the documentation says. Customer support, this is something I will admit I'm not really able to evaluate that well, but just based on the stories I've heard from other people, as well as the fact that this is, a subset of a subset of a subset of a product from Microsoft, which is a giant company compared to Jamf's flagship product, you just have to imagine Jamf Pro support is going to be so much better than Intune support when it comes to this. Outside support, I think, is even higher for Jamf Pro. There is so many consultants like us who live and breathe Jamf and know this platform inside and out. And as much as I'd like to say, hey, I can easily learn any other MDM platform, this has been a struggle to learn Intune. And I would never want to use this for any of my clients, partly because it's just much more limited. But man, I still don't know how a lot of things work here. So when it comes to having something like Jamf Pro, at least on the macOS side, that a lot of consultants support, whereas you might have a lot of consultants that support Microsoft Intune, but not really on the macOS side. They don't understand how that works. So it's going to be a lot easier to call someone up if you have a platform like Jamf Pro. And then third-party products is pretty related to this as well. Pretty much everyone that builds these third-party products are building in a lot of integration specifically for Jamf Pro. We have a lot of third-party products we've created, and they only work with Jamf Pro. They don't work with other MDMs. You could probably change the script to have it work with another MDM, but we build tools specifically in it for Jamf Pro, because Jamf Pro has a lot of cool integrations when it comes to things like policy parameters, or being able to do stuff using the Jamf Pro API, which is pretty robust. So third-party products, much better for Jamf Pro than you're going to see for Intune. And then there's the community. And I think this is obviously something Jamf really wins out in. Intune has a great community as a whole, but when it comes to the Mac side of it, it's nothing compared to Jamf Nation, right? And there's so many other conferences and presentations and remote meetups and all that stuff revolving primarily around Jamf Pro and what it can do. So much more of a community around that. And, with these different things we're talking about, documentation, customer support, outside support, third-party products, and the community. If you have a problem with Jamf Pro, it's going to be much easier to find a solution than if you have a problem with Microsoft Intune. And I know that after I've been searching to try to figure out how to deploy a firewall profile. It was hard, and I still did not succeed. So that's the support channels for Microsoft Intune. But let's talk about everyone's favorite topic, price. So here's kind of how it breaks down. I'm probably being a little bit overly simplistic with the pricing, but Jamf Pro, I'm looking at Jamf Pro business model because that compares most closely with Microsoft Intune. So this is $14 per user. This is USD versus Microsoft's Intune quoted price of $22 per user. That does come with Jamf Connect and Jamf Protect, which Intune doesn't have any product like Jamf Connect. However, Intune comes with a lot of other stuff. So at first glance, you might think Jamf's a lot cheaper than Intune, but I know most people aren't buying Intune just for Intune itself. They're getting the whole Microsoft suite of products. So when we're really looking at Microsoft Intune specifically for managing macOS devices, the reason people are considering it is because that price for them is zero because they're already paying for all these other things instead, and Intune is just lumped in with it. But that's overall, in a nutshell, what the pricing looks like. And now I want to give my closing thoughts and kind of give my recommendations on who this is for. So let's start with a quick comparison over everything we've talked about. So with policies, Jamf wins out a lot over Intune. Intune does not have nearly as many features or ability to do stuff as Jamf does with policies. Same with configuration profiles, they're pretty similar. However, I have to give Jamf a lot more on its side just because Intune had some problems with deploying a simple file vault profile. And those profiles take so long to update. And there's so many problems with deploying the profiles that even though it has a lot of the same profiles that Jamf does, the functionality is just not as good. Software updates I'm also giving to Jamf Pro just because of the flexibility with the API and stuff like that. But I will say Intune actually does win out on a couple things when it comes to software updates. Third-party patch management, though, Intune doesn't really even come close to Jamf. Jamf does a lot more with app installers. App installers are great. They're very powerful. Intune just doesn't have anything that compares to that. Same with smart groups and custom extension attributes. Jamf Pro, a lot more features when it comes to that, and they work a lot better. I'll say that as well. Prestage enrollments, Intune does support Prestage enrollments, but Jamf just has way more features when it comes down to it. Jamf Connect does win out as well quite a bit. There's really nothing in Intune that compares to it. Self-service, Jamf definitely wins out. Device check-in frequency, big win for Jamf there. Intune, with those really long check-in frequencies based on these like legacy cloud servers setup they have, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to have devices check in that slowly. It makes it so hard to manage and to troubleshoot if something's going wrong. Device compliance. Device compliance integration with Microsoft Intune is actually better through Jamf Pro. This might not be a fair comparison because you got to have both, right? But I did want to point out that the device compliance integration through Jamf Pro is actually better than just natively through Intune. However, if you don't have Intune, obviously you can't have any device compliance through Jamf Pro. Endpoint protection, I'm putting them both right next to each other. Both Jamf Protect and Microsoft Defender are pretty equal in what they can do. One may be better than the other, but honestly, when it comes down to it, you can use Jamf Protect with Intune, and you can use Microsoft Defender with Jamf. Like, they are agnostic of these platforms. I think they're really good endpoint protection solutions. Zero-touch provisioning, big win for Jamf there. Intune, I'm struggling to get even anything looking close to elegant when it comes to that, or consistent. Not really great on the provisioning front. Probably don't want to be handing these straight to users. Probably just want to be setting them up as an admin and handing them to the user afterwards because it is not a great user experience. The API, when it comes down to it, Intune's API is probably a little bit better than Jamf's just because it's more modern. But for us, what we really care about is what we're able to do with the API. And with Jamf, you can do a lot more. Not because their API is more robust, but just because Jamf Pro can do a lot more. Additional features, Jamf also has a lot more things that Intune doesn't have. Platform support, as we went over. Intune isn't that bad, but Jamf is much better when it comes to getting support for their product. And then last is pricing, and that is the one part that Intune definitely wins out on Jamf on. Although Jamf is technically cheaper, Intune is bundled in with so many other things that people that already have like Microsoft Office and Office 365 and these other business features will probably already have licenses for Intune on the macOS side. For a lot of people, it's really a difference of $14.33 per user per month or free. That's how these two compare. Let's talk about the takeaways. And I'm not going to say just because Jamf Pro is better that Intune is not for you. Because there's a lot of people that could be using Intune today to manage their macOS devices. So Intune may be for you and your organization if you already have the Intune licenses for Macs, right? You're not paying anything extra. You already have the Intune server set up. All you need to do is enroll the devices into your server. If you have a limited budget for macOS management, maybe you have no budget because you've just budgeted the Windows side and you have, a couple devices and you just want to get them under management. You have limited use cases for macOS management. You're not too worried about having very specific stuff in there, and the use cases that you do have can pretty much be covered by Microsoft Intune, knowing its limitations. You're managing less than 50 Macs. This is a pretty arbitrary number I've put together, but things do get more complicated the more Macs you have. Especially if you're a bigger organization working with Fortune 500 companies and bigger security departments, as soon as those Macs get above 50 or maybe 100, I'm not sure when the magic number is, but somewhere in that 50 to 100 realm, they start caring about things and they start saying, we need this endpoint protection solution on there. We need to know that everyone is file vault encrypted. We need to have certainty that all these things in place. And you just can't have that certainty with a platform like Intune, where it's just sometimes more difficult than it should be to do very simple tasks. And lastly, Intune may be for you if it's simply good enough for Mac management. And you can set this, if you already have Intune, start managing your Macs in there. And if you're like, this is good enough, you maybe don't need to invest in a bigger platform like Jamf Pro. Go ahead and manage them in Intune. But before you do that, I want to point out some things of why you might not want to use Intune. First off, you don't currently have Intune. This is really important. No one is buying Intune just to manage macOS devices. If you are doing that specifically to manage your macOS devices, that's ridiculous. No one's thinking to do that. The only people who are considering to manage Mac devices with Intune are people that already have Intune and already have those licenses. You are a K through 12 school district or a university. This is not built for education. It's really for one-to-one devices where you give a user a computer. If you're a school district or a university, you are going to have a very hard time managing your Macs with Intune. If you have specific macOS requirements, this probably isn't going to work too well for you. Like if you're picky, this platform doesn't allow for a lot of flexibility. If you're looking to match what you do on the Windows side with your Macs, this sounds counterintuitive because a lot of people think, okay, well, we have Intune for Windows. Let's get Intune for Macs because we want to match what we're doing on Windows with our Macs. The thing is, the Windows and Mac computers are just very different. And Intune, on what it can do on the Windows side versus the Mac side, is also very different. So if you're trying to match what you're doing on the Windows side, you need to get a platform that's much more robust so that it can copy those configurations over to your Mac computers. We've done this a lot on, and you can't do it perfectly, right? We're not going to bind the computers to AD, but we can give a lot of the same functionality using Jamf Pro. You can't do that through Intune. So if you're looking to match what you're doing on the Windows side, Jamf is really the best solution and Intune is not, which again seems super counterintuitive, but they just think of Intune for macOS as a different platform than Intune for Windows. They are entirely different, different feature set, different things you can do. This is another important one. If you are looking to migrate your Macs into Intune from a different platform, just to save on license costs, that is, I would highly, highly, highly recommend against this. First of all, migrations are very difficult. So if you're going to migrate to another platform, you better be sure that's the platform you're going to stick with. And Intune is more of a first platform than it is a second platform. You know, if you have 25 Macs and you already have Intune and you just want to get those Macs managed and you have, 1,000 or 10,000 Windows devices, throw those Macs into Intune. Why not? It's not going to hurt. You can always migrate to a different platform later. At least they're under management now. Do not migrate from like Workspace ONE to Intune or from Jamf Pro to Intune. It's not the platform you want to migrate to. It is not very good for managing Macs. If your organization is really looking to scale its Mac presence, so let's say you are in the place where you have 10,000 Windows computers and you only have 25 Macs, but your organization's looking at opening up employee choice. So you want to start investing into this Mac platform. This is the point where you may want to think, well, instead of investing this time and energy into Intune to put our Macs in there, let's invest in something like Jamf Pro. It doesn't have to be Jamf Pro, but like Jamf Pro that allows us to really scale what we're doing and set it up in a future-proofed way. That's going to be the right choice for you, especially if you have the budget for it. Because otherwise, you're going to be doing an expensive and painful migration later when you're going from Intune to another platform. So it's just better if you're looking to scale your Mac presence, if you're looking to offer employee choice, start out with the platform that's going to be your finisher and not your starter. And lastly, if Intune is not good enough to accomplish what you want, you may not want to use Intune. Don't try to put a square peg into a round hole. Intune's not going to work for everyone. It might work for some organizations when managing macOS devices. It's not going to work for everyone. And hopefully this video will give you a sense of what the limitations are of the Intune platform so you can make that informed decision before you get 6 months, 1 year, 2 years down the road of setting this up, which I've seen before. It's good to look at everything from the beginning and make a good informed decision before you start. Last slide, I swear. I want to talk about the fact that Jamf Pro and the Intune actually have a really close partnership. This started about 8 years ago when Jamf invested in making the integrations with Intune's conditional access. Now it's Intune's device compliance. But there is a lot of really cool integrations with Jamf Pro. Jamf Pro has never been an all-in-one platform. It simply isn't. You cannot manage Macs with Jamf Pro and Jamf Pro alone. Although they're building more things around Jamf Pro, it's really meant to be used with other platforms, and Intune is no exception. So first of all, there's the Jamf Pro device compliance, which I mentioned is actually better than the built-in Jamf compliance within Intune. Jamf Pro plus device compliance is really good. Jamf Pro with Microsoft Defender works just as good as Intune with Microsoft Defender. And you can even use it with Jamf Protect if you want those extra CIS benchmark reporting, and other features that Jamf Protect offers that Microsoft Defender doesn't. Jamf Pro with Microsoft Office. I mean, Not much to be said there. Microsoft Office can be used with any MDM platform, but it can especially be used with Jamf Pro. And of course, it works very well with the device compliance stuff as well. Jamf Pro can integrate with Entra AD. A lot of people talk about Microsoft's platform SSO for Entra AD. Jamf Pro can integrate with that just as well as Intune can. And then lastly, with Jamf Pro and Jamf Connect, you can have Active Directory integration with your Entra portal. And with Jamf Connect, you can even support Kerberos, which is another thing that you can't really do through Intune. So basically what I'm saying, if you have Intune and you want best-in-class management, both of these platforms work really well together. Yes, you're going to have to pay a little bit more for setup and licensing cost, but in the end, you're probably going to save money because you're going to have so many headaches just trying to do it with Intune alone. So that's my review of Microsoft Intune. A lot of information we went over today. I really hope you enjoyed this video and found it to be useful. In the future, you can find us at our Launchpad meetups, which I'll leave a link into the description in order to join. And of course, if you need help with your Jamf Pro server or with your Apple management, our team at Rocketman is happy to help and give a guiding hand or do some custom work if needed to show you how to set that up the best way possible.